SABC, host broadcaster of the G20 South Africa 2025.
All right, so just a note for you that you can join SABC News for our special G20 coverage from tomorrow. That's when we'll be bringing you live coverage from Nasrec until, I'm told, Sunday. Our team, of course, will be bringing you that comprehensive coverage. You can also stream us on the SABC Plus app and watch us live on SABC News and our pop-up channel. Make sure, of course, that you tuned in to get all the up-to-the-minute answers around this G20 summit in the lead-up, of course, to this weekend's gathering. Speaking of that, business leaders from around the world are meeting today for the B20 Summit. They'll reveal their final set of recommendations ahead of the G20 gathering. The program brings together voices from various industries as they outline what they believe should be done to guide economic decisions going forward. For more on this, let's bring in from the summit SABC News anchor Nompumelelo Siziba, who's watching developments from the Sandton Convention Centre. And yesterday, Nompu, we heard from the president speaking about the role that the executive has to play in making sure that the objectives of this G20 bloc are ultimately realized.
Thanks very much, Ayanda. Yes, the president was speaking to a group of CEOs yesterday. He had basically asked for that meeting to be convened because he felt it was important that government helps companies that are already operating on the African continent and those who are eyeing the possibility of doing that. You know that obviously because we have now moved into a more protectionist world where there's the new reality of tariffs from the United States. Countries around the world are now looking for new markets, and we have one right here on our doorstep on the African continent. We have players there, but there's a real drive now to push and forge ahead into the rest of the Africa, not just for the benefit of South Africa, but the whole continent. And so that was top of mind in the president's discussions with CEOs. And of course, they welcomed the initiative from the government that the government wants to support businesses that are foraying onto the continent. We're here at the B20 Summit, which is taking place over the next 2 days. The B20 basically speaks to the business leg of the G20. There are various formations that have 20. Labour 20, G20, of course, is the umbrella body. B20, we're here at B20. And I'm going to be in conversation now with the B20 Sherpa, Cas Kovadia. So he's basically the leader or taking charge of this particular initiative in South Africa. Thank you very much, Cas, for joining us. So it's been a busy year. So for the past year, you guys have been talking amongst yourselves and with your G20 business counterparts around issues that, you know, really affect you around trade and investment and smoothing the way to that. What are your impressions of this year? What have you learned, and what do you think you've achieved from this B20 year?
Okay, thank you for having me, and hi to your viewers. Look, this is, as we've said time and again, this is the first time that South Africa and the continent is hosting the B20. And we've been very clear right from...
Apologies, Cas. I think I'm just going to scooch over because I'm not doing very well. Continue.
Okay, so it's the first time we've hosted the B20. We didn't know what to expect. We talked to the previous host, Brazil, and they've been very good in their handover. But right from the beginning, we were absolutely clear that this isn't just South Africa's B20, it is Africa's B20. And we put Africa at the center of the agenda. We've had 8 task forces that started working in March to develop recommendations to the G20 to create the environment for inclusive growth, for prosperity, and to do that in a collaborative and cooperative way. That's been our theme. So the experience has been phenomenal. We've had between 150 and 200 people per task force because we had to accommodate all the G20 countries as well as countries from the continent outside of South Africa. I am absolutely honored to say that when I had a discussion with critical CEOs in this country, to chair those task forces. It was a 2-minute discussion. They all put their hands up, and we've had an amazing group of CEOs chairing these task forces. They put in a lot of work. They manage the task forces properly. We've had knowledge partners, we've had network partners, we've had a lot of support to do this, and a lot of work has gone into it. So I think that the sort of key takeaway is, one, as you said, we're in a world that the geopolitics are difficult, it's becoming protectionist, and that's one reality. The other reality is that the majority of the G20 countries, the vast majority of the G20 countries, want to work together, want to grow inclusive economies, and are quite clear, and that's the position we've held right from the beginning, that Africa's growth and development contributes to the growth and development of the world.
Cass, let me come in there. So you've talked about coming together as business, speaking with your counterparts around the world that are G20 members and even beyond that. But how do you ensure that what you put on paper in terms of ideas and possible policies that could be considered by the G20 heads of state is then translated into policy? All this work, all the effort, all the midnight oil that's been burnt, are you confident that at least 50% of some of the ideas may actually translate?
So this is the key question, because the B20, nor the G20 for the matter, doesn't have a permanent secretariat. So what's been happening up to now is that these discussions happen in the host country. The recommendations get handed over, and then the B20 gets handed over to the next country. And there's no follow-up, really, okay? What we've tried to do this year, and I've talked to the Sherpa in Brazil, talked to the Sherpa in the US, and I've met the British business people when I was in London, because I think they're taking over in 2027. And what we putting to them is that if we can develop even an informal virtual mechanism between these Sherpas to track the recommendations, to see which are implemented and which are accepted and which are implemented, and then those that are implemented, what's the impact of the implementation. So we deliberately planned this B20 so that we hand over the recommendations to the G20 reasonably early in the year, which was on the 4th of September. I've been running around all over the world in September and October advocating for those recommendations to other G20 countries through global formations and so on. Our government, when we handed over to Minister Lamola, when I had a chat with Minister Lamola after that, he says, look, your recommendations resonate with what our thinking is on the G20. So we'll work together on this. So we'll certainly see how many recommendations they get accepted, and then we'll try to establish this mechanism, because the B20 represents business. If business does not see implementation and impact, C-suite people start losing interest, and that would be a tragedy, because the B20 is the only body where critical business people from the North and the South sit together to discuss what are now common problems. Inequality, lack of growth, exclusion are not problems of the South, they're global problems. And so it's a good forum to actually discuss.
One last thing, Cass, before I let you go. We have the unprecedented situation where South Africa is going to be handing over its presidency, the G20 presidency, to an empty seat. That's what everyone is now saying. Which then begs the question, to what extent will the United States carry forward not just the ideas of the B20, but the G20 as a whole? How concerned are you about that? Do you just see this as a blip? Isn't this a genuine concern, given the fact that the United States is the largest economy in the world?
Look, it's obviously a concern, but it's not a concern that should immobilize us, okay? On the B20 side, American business have been very supportive, right from the beginning. We've had C-suite people participating in the task forces. Some of them have co-chaired some of the task forces. We've had a good relationship with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce in Washington. And so they've been very supportive. Even when President Trump announced, 2 weeks ago, that they're pulling out, On a Friday, I thought I'll wait until Monday to contact business people. I didn't have to. Over that weekend, they all contacted me to say, Cass, we're on track. Don't worry about this. Now look, on the government side, there's the empty seat, right? But I think it's what our president said a couple of days ago. Boycotts don't work. It's the US's loss if they don't participate in the G20. The G20 has agreed on certain things, and they're going to move on with those things. We hope that the US does join those initiatives, but we will certainly work with the US Chamber of Commerce in Washington to see how we can help them manage the B20 as best.
All right, Cass, thank you so much for that. Well, you heard Cass on what he had to say. The train is at the station, and those who don't want to get on board, well, tough luck. We're steaming ahead. All the very best to Cass and his team here at the B20. We're going to be here stationed, conducting interviews with a number of business people. So do stay tuned for that. It's back to you in studio.
Absolutely. We often hear government can't do it alone, and many of the people you'll be speaking to, Nompu, certainly have a role to play. That's why we'll be keeping a very close eye on developments from you and the rest of the team. That's our economics anchor, Nompumelelo Siziba, live to us there from the Sandton Convention Centre in Johannesburg.